Hello again. In this video, I'll lay out a few frameworks that we will be using throughout the different stages of our work. Product development is all about iteration over and refinement of ideas and eventually turning them into profitable businesses. But before that, allow me to demonstrate the importance of the very first item that we will talk about, validation framework. A lot of us start machine learning projects by coding, and that is not the right place to start. Some of us start from an idea that we think is brilliant. That's definitely better, but it's still not a good place to start. The reality is that most successful teams start with many ideas and go through a systematic process of eliminating bad ones until they are left with only good ones. Usually, better ideas are the ones that involve solving a specific problem for a specific user. Therefore, getting that user's feedback is extremely important. Therefore, the next step is to grab the better ideas, create mock-ups for them, and see how users react to those. This will weed out another subset of ideas. Then, out of the remaining ones, you want to create prototypes to answer a few questions like how would the user react to a more realistic looking version of your idea? Would the technical part that you're most worried about actually work? Or importantly, would somebody buy this? For this one, you might try to sell a very basic version of your idea and see if anybody pays for it. Again, after invalidating more of your bad ideas, you start coding. And you do that for the more promising versions of your idea. And that's the real validation of your idea being technically feasible. Once you have the most basic version of your end-to-end software ready, you're ready to start validating other product aspects, like how can you bring users to it? Can they actually use it, or would they continue to use it? Finally, you get to the point that the real big user solution fit question comes up. Do they want it enough to pay for it? Enough to justify the cost? In an ideal world, they even want it enough that you can have a profit and grow over years to come. In order to ensure that you can move along your journey as fast as possible and with as little risk as possible, you have to make sure you spend just enough time on each stage. For example, you should be able to come up with lots of ideas in a span of hours, and you should be able to invalidate some of them with a mock-up in a day or two. And putting the alpha version of your product in the hands of users shouldn't really take more than a month. This is extremely important because this journey is not a linear one, as I described before. It's very likely that you hit roadblocks in every stage that forces you to go back all the way to the drawing board where you have to come up with new ideas and restart the whole process again. To put some labels on these stages, the first stages are called discovery, then we move on to short-term validation and eventually to long-term validation. If you're lucky enough to go all the way to the end of this process for your core feature of the product, you have to repeat it for every single other feature that you want to add. As you can see, lots of what we are doing in product development is various types of validation. So let's establish a framework for it. After all, the science in data science should mean something. One point of caution that I would like to make is that what we are trying to do here is in fact invalidation of bad ideas. It is very dangerous if you think your task is to prove that your idea is good, because we are all human and prone to confirmation bias. We see what we want to see. Your task in fact is to identify ideas that won't work as early as possible to avoid any long-term investment that leads into disappointment. The framework that I'm about to lay out is fairly rigorous and can be used for all stages of discovery, short-term validation, and long-term validation. The first and foremost thing is writing down what you want to do. It's amazing how many times I've met people who are well into their projects but still can't articulate what it is that they are doing. Next, you need to know what assumptions you are making. For that, you do some exercise that I will lay out in more detail shortly. Those exercises will help you articulate what it is that you're doing, why to do it at all, and why to do it now, and eventually how you think it will happen. This will easily tease out a lot of assumptions that you're making about what you're doing. Next, you have to come up with a validation plan for these assumptions. This usually involves doing some sort of research. It could be either Googling or talking to potential users. Hopefully you learn a lot about the domain you're working in through these interviews and research, and you get to invalidate some of your assumptions. In all likelihood, you will end up repeating this a few times, every time equipped with learnings that will help you refine your idea about what you want to do, why, and how. For the validation plan, often you need to design experiments and you need artifacts for those experiments. Artifacts can be things like low-finesse mockups to the basic version of your application, all the way to an engineered version of the application, depending on what stage you're at. And you use these artifacts to carry out experiments, to do your research, to obtain qualitative, quantitative, and large-scale data about how users react to your application and idea. This framework can be applied to validate your massive transformative purpose, all the way down to what color a particular button has to be. Now, let's talk about one of my favorite frameworks. It's called So What framework. It might sound dismissive at first sight, but it is one of the most illuminating frameworks that I frequently use. It really can be used anywhere, but most importantly, I use it when I want to articulate what it is that I'm doing and why. When I want to identify assumptions I'm making about a problem or a solution. Or when I want to understand fundamentally why I want to do something, to see why that's a priority. The way it works is the following. You write down what you want to do. You read that and ask yourself, so what? And write down the answer. Then you read that answer and ask yourself, so what again? And then write the answer. And you repeat this 3 to 5 times before you get to the most fundamental reason. Now, a few things might happen. You might go through this with no problem, which either means that you're doing it wrong or you really know the domain of your problem. More likely, you might really struggle to do this beyond the second or third iteration. And that's good, because it means that you have identified things that you don't know, and you need to learn more about them and research them more. Remember, one of the principles, if you are stuck and you can't move forward, you have to research more, and most likely you have to talk to your potential users. In all likelihood, once you get to the 5th iteration, where you started might not sound like the most reasonable solution anymore. So you have to go back and modify that and repeat the exercise until everything flows through nicely and smoothly. Let's look at an example. For this case, I wrote the problem statement as I want to build a common pest detector for farmers. Notice that I have what I want to build and for who I want to build it. So I ask myself, so what? Why do I want to build this? The first answer is so that they can identify if their crop is infected as quickly as possible. The next thing that I will do is asking myself, why do I want that? And the answer is so that they can tackle the issue as soon as it appears and focus on the parts of the crop that are affected. Then I read that and ask myself, why would they want to focus on the parts of the crop that are affected? And the answer is so that they can only apply pesticides to the parts that need it rather than the whole crop. And then I go on and ask myself, so what? Why do they want to do this instead of applying it to the whole crop? And the answer is so that they reduce the amount of chemicals used, time spent, and cost of keeping their crop healthy. And I do that one last time, asking myself, why do they want to do that? So that they can save cost, improve efficiency, and reduce environmental hazard. As you can see, this is a process that starts from a very benign statement at the beginning about what I want to build and get to the most fundamental reason why I want to do this. Now, let's demonstrate how flexible this framework is. I can replace so what with why now, and then I have a why now framework. Here, the attempt is to map out your assumptions about the urgency of the work that you want to do with the same pattern as what we discussed. I'll put these up here as an example, but I won't go through the details. You can pause the video and read them if you want, but let me make a few points. All you're doing here is writing down what you want to do and why to document your assumptions. You still need to go through the validation framework to verify them. One of my favorite additions to this, to really tease out all the hidden assumptions, is to also write down how I envision the transition between each of the statements I wrote would happen. For example, in our farmer's case, in the second point I wrote that we want to do this now because we want to be the first vendor that does it at large scale. And then I wrote that we want that because it ensures loyalty of the farmers. Now, to tease out my hidden assumptions there, I need to write a few sentences about how I envision being the first vendor results in farmers' loyalty. And I bet I'm going to see a lot of assumptions that I'm making there. Final point, try to write these from the viewpoint of your user as much as possible. At the end of the day, you want to articulate why they want what you're building and why they want it now. Now it's your turn. Give it a try. Feel free to pause the video, read through the exercise, and do it yourself. We will use the output of this exercise for future exercises. Note that for the narrative that you see on the right, I usually find it easiest to start from the last statement in the so what exercise and work my way upwards to the what statement. This will first motivate why and then tells the audience what I want to do. A lot of the ideas mentioned in this video are inspired by these books, so make sure you add them to your reading list.